The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to Reproaction's Leadership Diversity Discussion Panel. I am your organizer and host slash panelist, like moderator slash panelist today, Ivania Woods, Senior Outreach Producer at Reproaction. And I'll get into a little bit more of that. There's my bio. I'm a Black feminist sociologist specializing in social inequalities, political economies. All right, and movements in reproductive justice spaces. I primarily lead and organize campaigns to increase birth control and abortion access. I address maternal and infant mortality rates and decriminalize HIV, and I also discuss reproductive justice issues as a co-host of Women's Issues, Women's Voices, which is a weekly feminist community radio show that airs Fridays at 6 p.m. Central, at least currently. I think we're moving to Monday at 5 here in a couple of weeks. But it's on KOP in Columbia, 89.5 FM, or you can go to kopn.org and listen from wherever you are through the internet. So today's agenda, we'll be talking about, and these are all Eastern times, don't freak out. This is the welcome, do the overview of the topic, which again is leadership diversity. I'll introduce the panelists, then we have time to have the discussion panel, and then we'll wrap things up with an audience Q&A if anyone has questions towards the end there, which is pretty standard. So I want to give a brief overview of leadership diversity. We're going to get into a lot of the core components. I just wanted to make 3 points from the foundational aspect of leadership diversity. And one is that like most longstanding movement organizations, they did not originate prioritizing leadership diversity. And all that means is that organizations that start out as intersectional, they take these things into consideration. That's what makes them intersectional. But when we're talking about practicing intersectionality, a lot of longstanding organizations have been around since, the 60s or 70s or 50s or 1800s, early 1900s, what have you. They really didn't start out with this as their foundation. So a lot of organizations have been transitioning into intersectional organizations, or like trying to build up the principles of intersectionality, and this being one of them, which is leadership diversity. So through that transition, but also post the transition and sustaining leadership diversity. So we're grounding this conversation in that understanding that like this information is relevant for a lot of people doing movement work, because for the most part, you're either with an organization that's transitioning or has transitioned either way, or even if you started out as intersectional, there's always that need to sustain the practices that keep your leadership diverse at every level, which is the second point. So at the core of practicing intersectionality is a commitment to increasing inclusion at every level of leadership. So from your volunteers to your staff to executive leadership and your board, right? Making sure that the people who need to be at the table are at the table, which we'll talk more about in the Centering the Marginalized panel that's in 2 weeks. But in this one, it's more like how to get people in and what you can be doing to ensure that your hiring practices or the way that you engage with people within your, once people are hired in, that you're sustaining that, right? And then the last point I wanted to make is that diversity and inclusion are vital to the process, because who is at the table determines both how solutions are generated and how they are implemented or enforced. And that is very important, because if you don't have diversity, like people who, from a range of backgrounds, people from a range of people who are affected, like various races, various sexes, abilities, sexualities, they're at the table, then you're going to be, that's just so much higher odds where you're going to get more of the same, which is white supremacy, because white supremacy is the default, right? So we want to be challenging that and making sure that we are integrating people's experiences and people's vantage points and understanding that their situated knowledge is just as important as maybe what you think from your position, right? Or from what you think may be objective, but it's honestly your subjective opinion as well. And so those solutions that you generate are going to be impacted. And then who's at the table to generate those solutions is going to depend on who respects the solution you came up with. It's going to affect who's implementing or enforcing those solutions based on if they respect that solution. As you know that a lot of our work in policy is generating policies that will reduce inequalities and put people in a position, especially in reproductive justice work, so that they can have bodily autonomy, reproductive justice principles. But if we aren't creating solutions or building our policy or, engaging in practices that are grounded in people's experiences and a range of people's experiences and incorporating those things and thinking about how people are differently affected, then the default, again, is white supremacy. And we're just going to come up with a variation of the same thing that's already been happening. So the first panelist that I want to introduce is Sarah Park. She's the operations director at Abortion Care Network. Sarah has over 20 years of experience working in HR, operations, and administration. Her experience spans the public and private sectors, government, nonprofits, legal, medical, contracting, education, and technology industries. Sarah is passionate about social justice and helping organizations align their practices with their values, which I just had a really good conversation about yesterday. And then Erin Matson is the co-founding director of Reproaction. Erin previously served as the Action Vice President of the National Organization for Women, as well as the editor-at-large for Rewire.News. Erin serves on the steering committee of the American Society for Emergency Contraception and recently completed 3 terms on the NARAD Pro-Choice Virginia Foundation Board of Directors. So we will all be bringing you this conversation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quickly. And so you can just see us, our beautiful faces, and we'll jump right into the questions. But before we do that, I do want to open up space to just ask y'all, how are y'all doing? How are y'all feeling? Sarah and Erin, y'all ready? Y'all good? All right, good. Okay, so the first question that I have for y'all is I want to start by giving people an idea of what vantage point that each of you are speaking from today. So what experience do you have in ensuring leadership diversity is valued and taken seriously? Sarah, if you can start us off, that would be great.
Sure. Well, making sure. Yep, I'm not muted. So I am a member of the executive or management team at Abortion Care Network. And my role there is specifically doing operations, human resources, kind of that realm. So I touch on hiring and onboarding, which is a large part of ensuring leadership diversity, and also our policies, which is a little bit of a two-step to get there, but it's my belief that having equitable policies and having policies that are inclusive is part of what helps bring in diverse leadership.
Absolutely. And Erin?
Hi, so I want to just first start off by saying that I believe that dismantling white supremacy is the most urgent issue everywhere today, including in our reproductive spaces. So a couple of things. First, I just want to start out by naming the unearned and unfair privilege that I've had my entire life as a result of being a white person, and commit to learning and listening today on the call. I was super excited when Eva asked me to participate. Thank you, Eva, because I think it's really important that white people need to step up and do this work as well. So I would say that the experience that I have on leadership diversity, or the vantage point that I bring, there are many places I could take this question, but I'll start with the fact that so Reproaction is an organization that I co-founded with Pamela Merritt, and we served as co-directors of the organization for 5 years. Pamela Merritt is a Black woman, and she is now honorary chair of our advisory council. We didn't totally let her go, and she went on to become executive director of Medical Students for Choice, a fabulous organization as well. And so, you know, one thing I want to say is that Reproaction does really radical work to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice that I'm super pumped about and proud of. But one of the things that I've often said to Pamela and elsewhere is that I think that actually some of the most radical work that maybe I'll ever do was the partnership that we had as co-directors. It's really rare in movement spaces to see multiracial leadership, true multiracial leadership taking place. And I say that honoring spaces that are led by people of color and for people of color. They're very important in our movement. We see very few examples. And then there are a number of white-led organizations that are not embracing that model. And so it's a different example, and I think that's the more unique vantage point that I bring.
I thank both of you. Mine is, of course, doing movement work and just loving to talk about this, but also from the academic side, my research is in movements and studying principles of intersectionality, and like my dissertation was completely on this, like the looking at a national umbrella organization and how they transitioned from single issue to multi-issue. I didn't call it intersectional because they didn't call it intersectional. They actually deliberately chose to not use that word. And so, yeah, I was like, let's set up a movement building series because that's where my heart is. That's where my interest is. And it's what I do at Reproaction. So yeah, that's every space I'm in. I'm always, whether I'm in academic spaces or movement spaces, looking at the leadership diversity to see. It's a really good way to see if people are serious about diversity and inclusion and equity, right? Like, if they are serious, you can just look at who's present and go from there. You know what kind of heat you have to bring from there just based on who's in the room. And so, all right, cool. So the next question is like, what is leadership diversity? And what pointers can you share that will help people be better at fulfilling it? And I don't mean this in like, give me a super technical definition of like, what is leadership diversity, but you can talk about it in those terms if you want, but also in the sense of what it looks like, what it feels like. And yeah, share your tips also in addition to that. So Erin, I'm going to let you start us off on this one.
Cool. So thank you for that, Eva. So diversity takes a number of different forms, including just who is present, who is physically in leadership. And I think that that's very important, but it's also not enough, that we need to have diversity in perspective, and especially it's about power, and it's about redistributing power to contravene white supremacy, which, as Eva noted, is the default. And if it's not addressed, that just is what continues. I would say another piece of leadership diversity that I just raised is that it's not simply about our movement organizations, but also about other pieces of our movement ecosystems, whether that's funders and what they're prioritizing, who's leading the funders, and who's making those decisions. And then things like our media and who gets media availability. And so that's kind of the first piece of the question. In terms of pointers, I mean, just to go back to some of these other institutions I was talking about, I think funders should definitely be on the hook to be clear about their own leadership diversity that they have within their structures, and then articulate their plans publicly for dismantling white supremacy, because it is this urgent work that they need to be doing. I think is how that shows up in the media. We've seen a lot of really, we're with the Texas law that's now gone into effect, we're seeing a lot of crappy coverage where, I'm seeing a lot of pieces where, you never even read about the impact being primarily borne by people of color. That's irresponsible and represents failures of institutions or publications, as well as editors and writers. So there's kind of everybody's on the hook for that. And then the last piece that I would say in terms of like pointers, if they're, I think, as somebody who is a white person, I think it's incumbent on me and people who look like me to listen a lot. But I will say for a pointer that I would have for other white people is to really commit to doing inner work and to challenge your own thinking. And there is no meaningful external work that can take place without inner work. And so it's something that I commit to every day, and I would encourage others in my position to do the same.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm like, yes. Very, very well stated. Sarah, where are you on this? What do you have to offer us?
Well, as far as what is leadership diversity, I would say that I would like to think about leadership diversity as going on beyond just racial diversity. I think that if we only focus on that, one thing that can happen is tokenism. I think also it's important to consider diversity as being as we're talking about intersectionality, all of the different things like people who are coming from poverty, thinking about things like having people on your team who don't all have the same level of education, thinking about what regions they live in. So that all ties into and it gives you a broader perspective on the work that you're doing. As far as pointers about what we can do to be better at fulfilling it, not exactly sure, but I think some of it is really getting your internal alignment ready to support diverse leadership. I think we've all seen situations where diversity hires are made, but there is an infrastructure that's in place to support those people. So they come in and then are kind of set up to fail. I think how you attract those people is part of it. So I think, like I mentioned, having diversity in maybe not all having types or level of education that goes into when you're hiring for leadership positions, really assessing what you're listing as your requirements. So if you are saying that if you're applying for a leadership role in an organization, you have to have a bachelor's degree or you have to have a master's degree, I think it's important to really dig into the why on that, and how those things might come into white supremacy, into tradition, the way things are normally done, and thinking about expanding that. How can we bring more people into these positions? Are there things that we could train people to do that they don't necessarily have an education or background in? But being able to lift those people up. And then also the policy piece of that is having inclusive policies, having policies that are open is what attracts people. If you recognize that people of color, people in poverty, these specific different areas have different needs, then I think you have to address the fact that your policies need to meet those needs too. And that's how you retain them, and that's how we stay away from just making token hires.
Well, y'all covered all my points. So I just want to iterate that I agree with all of it. No need for me to be repetitive. So yeah, I really appreciate that. The thing that I will emphasize though is that I really appreciate the attention to thinking more critically about once they're in right? Like making sure that the supports are there once they're in. Because oftentimes you're bringing, like I've had people ask me for recommendations for people to hire to bring into their position. I've had people ask me to come and do things, and I'm like, you want me to be on your board, but what does your board look like? Right? Because it's about the stress and the trauma that may bring on to me, and also like this expectation that because I'm a Black woman that I somehow can come magically like reform your entire board, and that I even want to do that, right? Or situations where people are like, we really want a person of color for this position. Do you have anyone that you can recommend? And that's been a part of my own journey where I had to think about that. Like, I do want more people of color doing this work, but under what circumstances, right? I don't want them to go into a hostile environment upon my recommendation when I know that this organization is everybody's white, right? And like your one job, and this one job is the least power at this organization that you want to bring in a person of color in for. So not only are they going to be the only person of color there, they're going to be the one there with the least amount of power. And that's starting your, diversity process. And I'm like, no, I have no recommendations for you at this time, but best of luck. So the next thing I want to know is like, can y'all share some of the things you do to break down misconceptions about what leadership diversity entails? Because we know with every concept, every practice, when people hear it, they hear different things. And I will just use the example of affirmative action and how people hear that, and it hits people differently depending on who they are and what they've heard about it. And so like, can you share some of the things that you do to break down misconceptions that you run up against, like when about what leadership diversity is? And Sarah.
Well, I think I can kind of expand on that just with what I was just saying with that. I think one of the misconceptions is that just hiring people of color is ensuring leadership diversity. So looking at it in a really singular way, or this is a quick fix, this is something that we can do, I'd say that is the misconception, is the simply having those people there, making the hires, bringing them onto the team is all that we need to do. And I think the reality is that, as I said, you have to have the supports in place for that. You have to have the policies and the systems that also support that. I'm not sure.
Okay. Aaron, you want to add to that? Unmute.
Yeah, that wasn't helpful. Okay, so I really appreciate that, Sarah, that point. And just first, I mean, I'll riff a little bit on the affirmative action and misconceptions since you brought that up, Eva. I'm a strong proponent of affirmative action. I think it's a really important and necessary step to take. And I've seen this play out in organizations that I've been involved in the past, where there's like this just really gross, there's a lack of a better word, really, actually there is a better word, there's an offensive and tokenizing approach that that can be taken to affirmative action that, however well-intentioned, can be really quite hostile toward people of color. And specifically, I've seen this play out in the past in organizations where like there will be quotas, which I want to be clear, I love quotas. I think I really like having targets, and I think it's an important tool for accountability. So I'm not anti-quota, but I've seen it where like it was a regional board seats, and there were 3 seats, and at least one of the seats had to be filled by a person of color, which is, I think, the intentions are very good on that. The way it often played out was people would say, okay, well, we're going to elect our person of color seat, and then we'll do the other 2 seats. And it's like, whoa, so you're basically saying that the other 2 seats are reserved for white people. And that's not the way. So that's one misconception that I've worked on personally in the past. The other one, a misconception that came straight to mind to me, being being a anti-racist white person, I also have white people who feel comfortable saying things to me I'm not sure if they would say elsewhere. And so I want to just openly acknowledge one of the things that I've heard other white EDs say to me is, and that I've challenged, is like, okay, well, a funder's not funding me anymore because they only want to fund people of color-led organizations. And I want to take that on directly because, first of all, I personally believe in abundance, and I think that's a really strange way of looking at the world. And I think there is so much to the truth to the cliche that people of color have to work twice as hard to get to the same place. So first of all, I'm not actually sure that, I think there's an implication that somehow it's like our work should be funded because of course we're up to this standard, and it's like, probably not. But then also, I think it's really important to look at and support changes in philanthropy, because the reality is that the vast majority of dollars in philanthropy, even in social justice, are going to white-led organizations. And so it's important for white leaders to support efforts such as a really good letter recently from the Groundswell Fund that was open to philanthropy, asking for more investment, particularly in Black women-led projects. So that's a misconception that I think exists and that it's really important to challenge.
Absolutely. So I just recorded the episode for this week's radio show that'll air Friday at 6 p.m. KOPN.org if you missed it, for the show Women's Issues, Women's Voices. And we discussed Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Cost Everyone. And that concept of zero-sum thinking, where it's like this scarcity mindset, where if you're in like this competition, this like race relations competition with like what the example you're bringing with the white EDs, they feel like if they're not getting the money, then they're getting the money. But like you said, that is not the case in reality. And one of the points that I made yesterday was that if people use their eyes and their ears, they can see and hear that this is not the case, right? So when people are saying things like, these people are coming and taking our jobs, it's like, okay, well, when you go to work, who's at work with you? What are the demographics? Who are you physically in space with, right? Or like, these people, when you look at your funding, what does your funding look like, right? Like who's actually funding you, and who's been funding you over the years, right? And of course, it creates this contradiction, or this, it's a contradiction where people will say, when you ask them about terms like Black Lives Matter, they're like, yes, they matter. If you ask them, should there be racial equality? Yes, it should be racial equality. But then when it comes to actually doing the things you need to do to get the equity and to get to the equality, to employ those things that'll get us there, it's a different story, because they have this zero-sum thinking and this scarcity mindset that's functioning with them that prevents them from seeing how white supremacy and racism, since that was the conversation of the book, it's also transfers to every other system of oppression, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and classism, and how those things keep everyone from getting what they need, right? And so if y'all haven't read the book, check it out. It's really, really good. All right. So this one has a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask them all, but then I'll ask y'all to just for the sake of the people who are attending, to just let them know what you're answering when you're answering it, right? And bring it back around. You're great. You can do it. So who do you tend to receive pushback from? How do you work to get these people on board? How do you push other organizers or your colleagues further in their appreciation for leadership diversity? And then how do you challenge your supervisors, employers, and funders to see the value of leadership diversity? And the reason why all of these questions are together it's because the original question, the main question is who do you tend to receive pushback from? And then the follow-up questions are just breaking down who I thought you may receive pushback from, like people on your board, your colleagues or the organizers, and also like your supervisors or the people who you employ or the funders that you're seeking funding from. And then so like, who do you receive pushback from? And then how do you work to get those people on board? So I'm going to start with Erin.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, this one, it's only fair and right to name exactly where the pushback comes from. It's a demographic. It's not necessarily a function. It's white women. That is where the pushback comes from. And so as someone who happens to occupy that identity, I see it very much as my job to address it and not to push it onto others to have to address it, because I know it's, first of all, it takes a ton of time that it takes away from the work and brilliance that people provide. And it's also painful, and it's crap that white women have to fix. So, so I think in terms of how do I push or challenge, I mean, I think one of the most important things, again, goes back to this inner work. I openly do inner work. Well, it's inner, so that's not the open piece, but I'm open that I do that work. And I think the more that I can model that it starts from within, the more that I can model being vulnerable, being willing to listen, being willing to grow, being willing to change, being willing to say like, yeah, that's wrong. I had my head screwed on wrong on that one, the more it makes it safe for others to do the same. And then I guess the last piece is just being willing to walk. I mean, I've gotten frustrated, back to this issue of, Eva, you were talking about how people like recruit you to boards and expect you to come in and fix that, and you're like, no thanks. You know, I've been on a number of boards where there are like circular discussions about how do we change the composition of the board, and being willing to walk too and just say, you know what, I can't be a part of this anymore is a really important piece as well.
Yeah, that's a conversation I've had a couple of times this week, and with white people. One was a white man, one was a white woman, and like really trying to get them to see that like they don't have to engage or they don't have to be the leaders, right? Like a lot of people think about their participation in this work. We are having this conversation about leadership diversity, but understanding that leadership happens at levels, right? There's levels of leadership, but there is something about white people who, the way that white supremacy is set up, right? Like the way that white supremacy has set up the personal whiteness, this concept, and how white people just know things because they're white, or just have like solutions because they're white, or yeah, I think that's good enough. But there's this notion that like if they're doing movement work, then they want to come in and they want to lead and be like in an executive lead position, or they're the ones behind the podium giving the speeches, or they're the ones leading the marches. And it's like, you don't have to do that, right? Like a big part of being a leader is being a follower. And even in being a follower, just because you're not like top tier leadership doesn't mean you're not leading, right? And it's like getting people to wrap their heads around that, in that may not be your strength. You may be struggling with this because that ain't where you're supposed to be, right? And it's like getting them to like bring it down a notch. I get that you're very passionate about this and you care, but there are people who are doing this work, and if you're coming in new to the work, you're not going to step in the door and be like, I'm leading this now, right? Tell me where to go. Where do I, and it's like, you could just listen and like chill out for a little bit and then work your way up. So yeah, anyway, I digress just a tad. So Sarah, who do you tend to receive pushback from, and how do you work to get those people on board?
Well, I think to be perfectly straightforward and follow Erin, I fully agree. It is white women, white feminism. That is where most of the pushback seems to come from, especially within the repro movement. I am relatively new to the repro movement, and it's been an interesting thing to observe for me. To also kind of expand on what Erin said about what do you do about it? How do you challenge it? I think some of it is by really examining what these spaces are and deciding which ones you're not going to participate in, what you're going to remove yourself from. I think, again, when we're talking about scarcity and abundance here, we have a feeling in some ways that we have to say yes to everything. We have to take every opportunity. We have to accept every offer of funding. And I don't think that that's actually the case. So I think in some of these, the way that we push back is by withholding in some ways, by saying and being clear about the reasons for doing so. By saying to a funder, like, I'm curious about your own leadership diversity. I think, you know, we have a tradition of kind of a power structure there where we feel like we need to do what they say because they hold the power / the money. And I think re-examining that dynamic in the first place is something that we all need to do. And that if enough people push back and on those things, that changes that dynamic. I think declining to participate in spaces that aren't diverse, that don't value diversity, is one of the ways that we can challenge those. And by saying the reasons that we're doing that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I'm still trying to figure a lot of this out.
That's what it is. It's a process. I often have to remind myself that it's a journey. It is a journey, ever changing, ever changing. And so, yeah, thank y'all for sharing that and making that so personal and speaking from your experiences, which is what you're here to do. But I do appreciate that. So I think about that, and I'm like, how do I work to get these people on board? I don't. My patience left a long time ago. With things like this, basic things like this. I'm like, this is basic. Like, if you don't understand the importance of leadership diversity, you should not be in the position to be running an organization or anything that requires, that's like in a movement space. You're not the person to lead. So there's no reason for me to be working with you because you should not be here. So I definitely am a fan of putting my energy where I feel like, you know, it would be better placed. Like if I'm doing these remedial things and you're a leader of an organization, but if you're not a leader of an organization, we're just like having a conversation with some colleagues and breaking down concepts and thinking about the way that these things work. And like how, Erin, you made the point that these white women will say things to you that they may not say in other spaces or with other people around, who don't share y'all's identities or they don't see as sharing their identities. Then it's the same way for like people of color. So like I'll hear things from Black women that they may not say in other spaces. But the thing about that is that just being a person of color or being someone with a marginalized identity does not make you an expert on leadership diversity or even centering most marginalized or building coalitions or like principles of intersectionality. They don't necessarily have a value for it. So a lot of these conversations I do engage in is some of them are with people of color as well, because from this point of view, I can understand it in the sense that a lot of what we've had to do through life is to conform. So where, you know, you may have felt like you needed to talk a certain way, right? To get into certain spaces or for people to see you in a certain way, dress a certain way, wear your hair a certain way. And a part of our work is like we've internalized, you know, white supremacy and racism and ideas about, you know, homophobia as well, especially with Black people. It's a real problem. And so getting people, like, as we are shedding those ideologies that are, again, deeply rooted in white supremacy, getting them to understand that even though they have marginalized identities, that their experience isn't the experience even for those identities that they hold. That's where my pushback comes from. So it's like, yeah, we still need diversity. Like, just because everyone here is Black doesn't mean, like, we have, like, there are spaces where we have similar education levels, and then it's like, okay, well, we need to bring in some people that don't. We need to think about class. Like, even if this is work we're doing that is for, is, you know, like, we're Black people and we're doing it for Black people, we still need a range of identities to fit in here, right? Where are the queer people at? Where the people who could speak to, like, disabilities and what they need to get around, and to have access to the things that they need. We need poor people to talk about their experience currently, right? Because a lot of us, even like maybe being poor in the past, are maybe not there now because we've been working a little bit and have been able to accumulate a little bit of money because we're all still poor, okay? But in thinking about that, so how do you get, my pushback is usually from people who have marginalized identities, who feel like because they have those identities that they are somehow experts and don't need to work at it when the work still needs to be done. And that's primarily from Black men, in my case, cishet Black men who feel like because they're Black men that they somehow know what all Black people need. Like, there's no Black women here. What are you doing? So yeah, moving on. How do you navigate movement spaces that are not diverse and inclusive? And we've kind of talked about this, so I'll just ask y'all, like, if there's anything you want to add to, I guess, like, wrap up that aspect of this discussion we've been having. And Sarah.
I guess I would just add that one of the things that I think we know about all of this is that we have to meet people where we are or where they are. That it's hard to be black and white about this. Like, I'm going to work with you or I'm not. You're going to have a diverse leadership team or we're going to do nothing with you. I think we have to understand that this is a process for people and that we want to help them get there. We don't want to just call them out for the ways that they're failing. And so I think that is part of it. The navigating is the, how do we call these people in instead of calling them out? I think, you know, we don't want to go out and post something on our social media about, did you know that this organization is all white leadership? We want to think about ways that we can connect with them and talk about that, not putting people on blast. I think that that's one of the ways, is really trying to meet people where they are and help them get where they want to go.
Thank you for that. Beautifully stated. Erin?
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that, Sarah, because it really is, you know, the call out often actually makes people entrench further in their position and it actually get worse. So, you know, back to Eva's word, like, how do you navigate these spaces that are not diverse and inclusive? Like, the short answer is I try to navigate my way out of them. But in terms of you know, real tactics, so on that point of calling in, I've had it before where I've had one-on-one conversations with people where they're asking me to do one thing, and I will tell them frankly in a one-on-one and a caring manner, it's hard for me to see this proposed thing that you're doing in any light other than white supremacy. And then just go quiet and let them talk. And let them talk. And let them talk first, and then say my piece, right? And then just hold the space and not back down from what I said, but also not come at them guns blazing, because my real goal is to bring them along the journey, not make them get defensive and actually regress on the journey, right? But then also being cognizant that it can also go too far. I will say it from their end. I will say it clearly and directly once, but, you know, actually there's a recent thing that I actually had the other day from a conversation I'm thinking about that I actually had, where I said, you know, it's hard for me. I'm so disappointed that you're doing this. It's hard for me to see this in any other lens than white supremacy fighting back against, just to say it directly, against a Black woman in leadership who I see doing a good job. And so I got actually the other day just a really short complaining message about this issue again. And I looked at it and I started typing, and then I started typing and then I stopped and I realized, you know what, I've already said it once clearly and my silence is going to speak on this one.
I really appreciate that. I think I would add to it that makes me think about one of the ways that white supremacy shows up in the workplace. They say is right to comfort, and that we don't immediately jump in then and say, oh, it's okay, it's okay. I like that you identified what you saw and then let them talk without coming back or coddling. Or I think that's part of it, is even just knowing what are the ways that white supremacy does show up, like right to comfort, like perfectionism, things like that, and being extra aware of those things.
Absolutely. So before I get to the last question and we wrap this up, is there anything else that y'all want to add that maybe we didn't get to when you were answering the questions and you were like, I want to make sure I say this, or just anything? Nope. All right. So what types of support would you like to see in your work, and what would help you extend your platform and reach more people? Erin?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would put this from an anti-racist lens. I would put this question elsewhere, like, how do I extend my platform to other people? And specifically for me, one of the things I directly share with funders is other Black-led organizations that I believe they should be funding as well if they aren't already. I like to do the shine on theory. Again, abundance is the mindset that I try to inculcate. And then, I just want to be transparent here that because we are having this discussion, that I acknowledge that there's a lot of work that remains for me to do, and specifically in our organization period. And we are now a white-led organization. We weren't when we started, and we weren't for 5 years. And I think it's really important for us as an organization to intentionally invest in looking at the ways that white supremacy is imbued in our work processes and how we get our work done, and just being cognizant of the fact that this organization has changed a lot just by the leadership transition that we've had. And so yeah, that's in terms of types of support to see the work. I just am eager to get more of that work underway in our organization.
What types of support would you like to see in your work, and what would help you extend your platform and reach more people?
Well, I'm a little vague on this, but I think some of it is, this might be a little off, but funding. I think the way things get funded is some of this. I'd like to see funders funding organizations to do internal work. I think we have a big history of general operations and that type of work not being funded. Funders want to put their money into programs and things that they can show off and look shiny and exciting and can go on a blurb about something. But I think we need to see funders giving money specifically to organizations that they can use for DEI work, for internal work, for hiring consultants to do policy work, to come in and do pay equity, to do the types of things that actually change the ability for leadership diversity within the organizations. And I'd love to see that shift. I think that would be something that would help all of us. And then I think the other type of support would just be that there is more communication between organizations and more openness and vulnerability about how we're doing this work, and sharing information and saying, like, hey, we're not there yet. We're not perfect. We're not trying to be the shining example for this. and let's all work together to figure out how we can be better, to be collaborative, and to be vulnerable.
That's great. Yes, I like both of those. And the reason why I posed that question or those questions in the way that I did was just like the way that you see your work, however so defined, however you see it, just thinking about like what would make it easier, like even outside of this leadership diversity conversation, but just like I should have explained that initially, but it's fine. Yeah, and I think that like extending our platform is always needed when you have people with something to say that's valuable, that people will find valuable. There's way too much, it's way too easy to find wrong and bad information. Yeah, and way too hard to find things that'll actually help you and be useful, or get connected with people who can help you and be useful without overburdening that person, of course. All right. So that wraps up the panel. We got done super early because we are a panelist short, but also because I was determined to not be long-winded, which I was successful at. Gained my encouragement through you two being so concise. Really, definitely appreciate it. So going to go ahead and wrap this up by first, Sarah, if you want to let people know in what ways could they maybe contact you, find out more about what Abortion Care Network does and all of those things. And then Erin, I'll give you an opportunity to give that whole spiel for Reproaction, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So Sarah, yes, how can people learn more about Abortion Care Network?
Well, you can go to abortioncarenetwork.org. You can find us on social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of the usual places. You can reach out directly to me if you want to talk about anything. I'm Sarah at abortioncarenetwork.org. And you can also find out more about what we're doing with some of our clinics right now at keepourclinics.org, which is another program of ours that we're running.
Thank you so much. And then Erin, tell us about where they can learn more about Reproaction.
Yeah, and first, just a serious shout out to Abortion Care Network that is holding it down right now in a really, really, really difficult time for abortion providers. So thank you. So Reproaction, we're reproaction.org. We're on all the social networks, just like Abortion Care Network. And it's a lit place, so please join us online.
Absolutely, and it's Reproaction at all of those places. You can go to our website and join our listserv and check out all of our campaigns that we are working on. And right now, I know a lot of people may be interested in the self-managed abortion campaign, so come check us out. And yeah, so all right, thanks for attending or for viewing this later. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, that's me done recording. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. All right, so
Thank you so much.
just us now, just a quick debrief. How are y'all feeling?
Okay.
Getting done early. I know you gotta feel good about that. Yay. All right, so thank y'all so much, both of you. I'm gonna let y'all go and go and like give Cecilia some not so nice words about missing this panel and then get back to work on other things. So y'all have a good day. Bye.
Have a great rest.
Thank you.